I have a question maybe while George is coming up. This is something that comes up with a project that I've been working on, and I know how controversial autism is. And so so it's great from the research perspective, we put all this data out there and hopefully people have access to it and can move the discovery along. But then the other side of the coin is that the public has access to the data. And for a lot of controversial issues like environmentally influenced diseases or autism, sometimes it can become an alarmist thing. And so I don't really have a question except that there's also this sort of cautionary tale to some of
there's no question about that. I think we've taken the approach that we're making data available to the research community. So if you file, in order to file a data access agreement, you have to really be at an institution that has a federal-wide assurance. So the data in NDAR are not available to the public. I know that's why we do it for just that reason. I really think that Stephen and others who've talked about crowdsourcing are onto something, that you'd really like to make this data available to everyone, but that's something we haven't really figured out how to do with human subjects with the consent structure that we have now. It could be that this individualized consent will actually solve that problem, but I think for now, this is about the best we could come up with.
First of all, thank you for a very thoughtful talk and a great example of a database. My question is one that's been bothering me about a lot of large databases and maybe is an acute problem here. And it's, in this case, one of real shifts in diagnostic criteria and apparent incidents. And I mean, how do you deal with that? Can you simply, break down samples or data sets by date that they're entered or date of diagnosis? Or, I mean, how does one deal with this to maintain the quality of the data set?
So I think there's a difference here between the experimental data, which would come from the ADOS or the ADI type of instrument, and the analysis of that. So in some sense it's a raw data versus phenotyping question, and I think that there's not a lot of agreement in the community about exactly where you draw these phenotypic boundaries. I think it's clear that the reported prevalence of ASD is going up. It's still, I think, not entirely clear how much of that, what the root causes of that are. But, the only way around that is going to be to aggregate the data. We do know when data are deposited. So you could do searches that, data prior to X year is, for my purposes, is not valuable. It is a hard problem, and at some point we'll know what the right answer was. But I'm hopeful that NDAR has sufficient hooks that will be able to allow people to search by things that ultimately are very useful. I think it gets back to that point that often it's true that early databases aren't nearly as useful as they're going to become.
So I have a question from this side. And go back and forth. So Rick Wychuk from NIEHS. So you've indicated that there's only minimal data, environmental data in DAR. So we know that autism is likely to be a disease that is highly influenced by the environment. So you've put together this huge data infrastructure, lots of sequence, lots of phenotypic information, but why is it that you and others that are part of this database are not absolutely insisting and didn't at the beginning say, this is an environmental disease, we have to pay attention to the environmental insults that are likely to be causing this? So I've got another question that relates to governance, but why don't we deal with this one first?
So, it's a good point, and I guess the reminder is that what we're doing is we're aggregating NIH-funded research and research from other areas. So what we have reflects what's been funded by NIH. If someone gave me all the money that is currently being spent on autism research, would I spend the money in exactly the way that that it's being spent now? Maybe not. And I think your point is a good one, that we don't have information that we're clearly going to need. But we're not directing an overall research program. We're simply aggregators at this point.
The second question relates to governance of your database. So what is your governance structure? And could a properly designed governance structure kind of feed back to the institutes and say, we have this database with all of this genomic information and clinical information, but what's lacking is this, and that it needs to be feeding back to hopefully then fund the type of work to plug the gaps.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The governance structure is twofold. The institute directors that contribute money to NDAR get together once a year to hear what we've done, and so that's the overall governance level, because those are the folks who are coming up with money each year, making the decision each year to continue funding. There's a group of program staff that meet monthly where we go through more nuts and bolts types of details. I think the real question you're asking is, in some sense, almost a portfolio analysis, except that we can do real portfolio analysis here because we got real data. We're ready to do that, but so far we haven't been sort of asked to do that, but we can.
Barbara Wold, Caltech. This actually relates to the prior question, and it goes to the issue you're talking about, whether to use the ADIR, for example, as a way of not labeling a phenotype as autism, but allowing people a user to choose to go to the next layer of primary information and make their own choice by their own review. We see this also in cancer, and there's much discussion of how nice it would be if we were able to do all kinds of knowledge compression as well as compression of primary data, including lossy compression. And while it's very appealing to think about reducing down the size of data structure, I think the take-home lesson at this time, and it may always be so, is that actually allowing users and the community to have layer upon layer right down to the primary data and paying for the access to it and paying for the keeping of it in an archival kind of way, at least, if not an easy-to-use way, is absolutely critical, because you don't know when you gather it about these drifts in diagnosis, about all the popular wrong pathology on a particular kind of tumor, and so on and so forth.
Yep. Now, we're in complete agreement with that. That's why you can do the searching on the primary data or on these upper-level phenotypic types of searches. We're absolutely.
Okay, I think we're going to move on.